In this stage, we are stepping off the map and onto the trail. You can learn a lot from charts, product guides, and training calls. But sometimes the clearest lessons come from seeing how a case actually unfolds. Where did the conversation begin? What question opened the door? What roadblock showed up? And just as important, what did the agent do next? Now, for compliance clarity, these trail stories are fictional composite examples inspired by common field situations. They are designed for training, not as promises of results. Every client situation is different, and annuities may be appropriate for a portion of a client's savings depending on their goals, liquidity needs, risk tolerance, time horizon, and suitability. As we walk through these stories, pay attention to the process. The strongest agents do not start with a product, they start with purpose. They ask clear questions, organize the facts, and help the client understand how different dollars may need different jobs. Some of these stories are wins, some are losses. And honestly, the losses may teach us even more. Because on the trail, a wrong turn is not wasted if you learn how to read the signs better next time. Here are some important disclosures to read over before we begin, and to keep in mind throughout the presentation. Now, before anyone starts looking for names, dates, or client files, let's be clear. These are fictional composite examples. That means they are based on common agent conversations and common field situations, but they are not real client cases. Think of them like practice hikes. The terrain is realistic, the lessons are useful, but we are not pointing to one specific person or one specific outcome. You'll see the trail map on the right, and it gives us the path we'll follow. We start with income needs. That is the first checkpoint, because an annuity conversation should begin with what the client is trying to accomplish from an income standpoint. Are they looking for income now? Income later? An income stream for life? Or are they trying to protect a portion of their retirement savings from market-related uncertainty while still keeping the rest of their assets available for other needs? From there, we move to client goals. Goals help guide the discussion, but they do not replace the fact-finding process. As agents, we need to slow down enough to understand the client's time horizon, risk tolerance, liquidity needs, existing resources, and overall financial picture. That is where a clear strategy session can help keep the conversation organized and educational. Next comes suitability. This is not a box to check at the end. It is part of the trail the entire way. Annuities may fit a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on individual circumstances, product features, and suitability requirements. They are not designed to be a one-size-fits-all answer, and they should be discussed in a balanced, fact-based way. Then we get to lessons learned. This is where the trail stories can really help. We will look at what worked, what did not work, and how the agent could improve the process. Sometimes the lesson is about asking better questions, sometimes it is about explaining product features more clearly, and sometimes it is about recognizing when a product may not be appropriate. The goal here is not to memorize a script or force a product into a conversation. The goal is to build a repeatable process that helps clients understand their options and helps agents grow their business responsibly. So grab your map, watch your footing, and let's learn from the path before we take the final step. Alright, trail team, let's meet Ben. Ben is a solid agent. He knows the products, he cares about doing the right thing, and he is trying to help the client make an informed decision. But on this particular hike, Ben made one very common field mistake. He moved faster than the client was ready to go. Here is how it started. The client said, "I hate losing money in the market." Now, if you have been in enough client conversations, you know that sentence can feel like a big flashing trail sign. Ben heard it and immediately thought, fixed indexed annuity. And from a product knowledge standpoint, you can understand why his mind went there. Fixed indexed annuities can provide principal protection from market losses and may offer growth potential through an index-linked interest strategy. But here is the roadblock. The client had not yet explained what the money was supposed to do. Ben did not yet know whether the client needed income now, income later, an income stream for life, liquidity, legacy planning, or protection for only a portion of their retirement savings. In other words, Ben saw one footprint on the trail and tried to name the whole mountain. That is where the conversation started to get off track. Instead of continuing discovery, Ben began explaining fixed indexed annuities, features, benefits, how indexing works, all useful information at the right time. But this was not the right time yet. The client responded with, "I need to think about it." Now that does not automatically mean the client objected to annuities. It may mean the client felt the conversation moved to a product before their goals were fully understood. And when that happens, even a reasonable strategy may feel premature. So the lesson on this slide is not, Ben chose the wrong product. We do not know that yet. The lesson is that Ben skipped a few trail markers. Before discussing any specific strategy, a clear process should come first. Income needs, client goals, suitability, and then product education if appropriate. Annuities may fit a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on individual circumstances, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements. But the conversation should not start at the product, it should start with the client. So for Ben, the roadblock was pace. He was not trying to pressure the client. He was trying to help. But good intentions still need a clear process. On the next part of this trail story, we will see how Ben recovered by slowing down, asking better questions, and moving the conversation back to discovery first. Alright, so last time on the trail, Ben got a little ahead of his hiking group. The client said, "I hate losing money in the market." And Ben immediately started talking about fixed indexed annuities. His product knowledge was not the issue. The issue was that he reached for the trail marker before confirming where the client actually wanted to go. Now here is the good news. Ben recovered. He followed up with the client and changed the pace of the conversation. No big speech. No pressure. No trying to defend the first conversation. Just a more process-based approach. He said something like, "Before we discuss any strategy, let's get clear on what this money is supposed to do for you. Is the goal income, protection, liquidity, or leaving money to family?" That one shift changed the conversation. Instead of starting with a product, Ben started with purpose. And that is a much better trailhead. Now the client had room to explain what mattered most. Maybe they were concerned about future income. Maybe they wanted less exposure to market-related losses. Maybe they needed access to funds for unexpected expenses. Or maybe they were thinking about how a portion of their savings could support family later. Ben did not assume, he asked. That is the key lesson here. Do not diagnose before discovery. A clear strategy session gives the agent and client a more organized way to look at the facts. Income needs. Client goals. Time horizon. Liquidity needs. Risk tolerance. Existing resources. And then, only after those items are understood, product education may become appropriate. And notice what happened. The second conversation was more productive, because Ben made the client's goals the center of the discussion. He was no longer sprinting up the trail yelling, "I found it!" He was sitting at the map table saying, "Let's understand the route first." That is a big difference. Annuities may fit a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on individual circumstances, product features, and suitability requirements. But the process should help determine whether a strategy may be appropriate. The product should not lead the conversation. So Ben's recovery gives us a strong field reminder. Clients may respond better when they feel the agent is listening, learning, and helping them understand their options step by step. That is how an agent can become a reliable resource, support responsible education, and grow their business through a clear process. Trail note for this one. Discovery first, strategy second, product education only when appropriate. Alright, trail team, our next trail story brings Ben to a different kind of checkpoint. This time, Ben is meeting with a widowed client who has 3 separate accounts sitting in front of her. A checking account, an IRA, and an older annuity she does not fully understand. Now picture the scene. The client has statements spread across the table. One folder says checking, one says IRA, one says old annuity. And somewhere in the middle of all that paperwork is a very understandable statement. "I don't know what my husband set up." That sentence is important. It would have been easy for Ben to hear old annuity and immediately start reviewing replacement options or talking about a new product, but that would have been moving too fast. In this situation, the opportunity was not to recommend something new right away. the opportunity was to help the client get organized. Because before any income planning approach can be considered, the client and agent need a clear inventory. What income sources does she already have? What are the account values? Who are the beneficiaries? What are her monthly expenses? How much liquidity does she need? Is the existing annuity still serving a purpose? Are there surrender charges, income riders, death benefits, or other contract features that need to be understood? That is the trail map for this conversation. Ben's job at this stage was not to diagnose. It was to help sort the gear before choosing the route. And that matters, because annuities may fit a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on individual circumstances, product features, liquidity needs, income needs, and suitability requirements. But you cannot know whether a new strategy may be appropriate until you understand what is already in place. So the roadblock here was not resistance, it was confusion. The client was not saying, "I do not want help." She was saying, "I do not know what I have." That is a very different conversation. For agents, this is a strong reminder. Sometimes the most valuable first step is not explaining a product. Sometimes it is helping the client build a clear financial inventory, one folder at a time. And as we will see in the next part, Ben handled this one by slowing down, reviewing the facts, and making understanding the first destination on the trail. Now let's come back to Ben and the widow, with 3 accounts. This is where Ben did something really important. He did not criticize the existing annuity. He did not suggest changes immediately. And he did not treat the older contract like a dusty backpack that needed to be tossed off the trail. Instead, he slowed the conversation down. He reviewed the statements. He explained key terms in plain language. And when there were details that needed confirmation, he recommended that the client verify them directly with the issuing carrier. That is a strong process-based approach. Because with an existing annuity, the details matter. The contract may have surrender charges, it may have an income rider, it may have a death benefit feature, it may have a current interest crediting method, or other provisions that should be understood before any change is even considered. Ben helped the client create a trail inventory: income, expenses, beneficiaries, account values, and liquidity needs. And once that inventory was in place, the conversation became much clearer. The client decided to keep one account unchanged. That is an important point. The outcome was not replace everything. The outcome was understand everything. After reviewing the facts, only a portion of another account was repositioned into a principal-protected income strategy. And that approach would still need to be based on the client's individual circumstances, product features, income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, and suitability requirements. That is how this trail story becomes useful for agents. Sometimes, the positive outcome is not replacing an existing account. Sometimes the positive outcome is helping the client understand what they already have. And when a client understands what they have, they may be better prepared to identify where income gaps may exist, what resources are available, and what role, if any, an annuity may play within a portion of their retirement savings. So here is the trail note for Ben's story. Do not rush past the inventory stage. Before discussing a new strategy, help the client sort the folders, understand the terms, confirm the facts, and identify the real income need. Because on this trail, clarity comes before action. Picture Kyle standing at a fork in the trail. In one direction, there is a newer annuity product with features that look useful. In the other direction, there is the client's existing contract, older, maybe not as exciting on the surface, but still very important to review carefully. And right between those two paths is the sign every agent needs to notice: pause. Ask questions, get the facts. Kyle was reviewing a client's older annuity and noticed that a newer product appeared to offer features that could potentially improve the client's income options. Now, that can happen. Products change over time, features change, income options may change. But a newer product does not automatically mean a better fit. That is where the real work begins. Before Kyle could make any recommendation, he needed to understand what the existing annuity already provided. Did it include a valuable income benefit? Were there surrender charges? Were there rider features, fees, guarantees, or restrictions that could affect the client's outcome? As Kyle reviewed the contract more carefully, he found 2 major trail markers. First, the existing contract had a valuable income benefit. Second, surrender charges would apply if the client moved the money. That changed the conversation. The opportunity was no longer just, could a new product offer attractive features? The better question became, would replacing this contract be suitable after reviewing the full picture? That is a key distinction. Annuities may fit a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on individual circumstances, income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements. But replacement should never be based only on what looks appealing at first glance. So Kyle's challenge was clear. Slow down, review the existing contract, compare the facts, and let suitability guide the next step. On the next slide, we will see what happened when Kyle realized the best recommendation may be no change at all. Here is where Kyle earns his guide badge. He had a newer product available. He had a client who was open to reviewing options. And he had enough product knowledge to explain how a new strategy could work. But after reviewing the existing contract, Kyle recognized that moving the money did not appear to be the more appropriate path. So he documented the review and told the client, based on what we see today, keeping this contract may be more appropriate than moving it. That may not sound dramatic, but it is exactly the kind of process-based recommendation agents should be prepared to make. Kyle considered the client's current contract, the income benefit, the surrender charges, and the client's needs. Once those facts were on the table, the recommendation became clearer. No replacement. No new application was submitted. No account was repositioned. And that was still a strong outcome. In this fictional example, the client later referred Kyle to a sibling because Kyle provided a clear, fact-based review. He did not push for a change. He helped the client understand why staying put may have been the better option at that time. That is an important lesson for agents. Not every review should lead to a new application. Sometimes the best recommendation is to keep the existing contract in place. Sometimes the most valuable thing an agent can say is, after reviewing this, I do not see a reason to move it today. That kind of discipline supports a compliant, education-first process. So the trail note here is straightforward. Review before recommending, document what was considered, and let suitability come first. A strong agent knows when a new strategy may fit, and when the better answer is no change. Sometimes, a client brings more than statements and account values to the conversation. Sometimes, they bring a story they heard from someone else. That is where Rob found himself. He sat down with a client ready to learn more about their income needs, and before he could get very far, the client crossed their arms a little and said, "My friend told me annuities are bad." Now, that kind of comment can feel like a boulder dropped right in the middle of the trail. An agent might be tempted to push back right away. Well, that is not true. Or, your friend does not understand. Or, let me explain why this product is different. But Rob did not take that path. He recognized that the client had a broad opinion, but not necessarily contract-specific understanding. In other words, the client was reacting to the word annuity, not to a specific product, feature, cost, benefit, limitation, or suitability review. That is an important distinction. So Rob stayed calm and said something like, "That can be fair to ask about. Annuities are not all the same, and they are not right for every dollar or every person. Let's focus on what you need this money to do." That response did a few things well. First, Rob did not argue. Second, he did not make a blanket statement that all annuities are good. And third, he brought the conversation back to purpose. Because the real question is not, are annuities good or bad? That question is too broad to be useful. The better question is, what does the client need this portion of money to accomplish? Is the client looking for an income stream for life, principal protection, tax deferral, liquidity, a legacy feature? Or maybe the answer is that an annuity may not fit their circumstances at all. That is why discovery matters. The roadblock in this story was skepticism. The client expected a product pitch. Rob's job was not to win an argument around the campfire. His job was to listen, clarify, and guide the conversation back to facts. Annuities may be appropriate for a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on individual circumstances, income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements. So the lesson in part 1 is this. When a client says, "I heard annuities are bad," do not grab a brochure and charge uphill. Start by asking what they heard, what concerns they have, and what they need the money to do. That is how Rob kept the trail open. Here is where Rob made the conversation useful. He did not try to prove the client wrong, he did not turn the meeting into a debate, and he did not start comparing one product against another just to make annuities sound better. Instead, Rob slowed the pace and explained that annuities can serve different purposes at a high level. He walked through the categories in a clear way: income, principal protection, tax deferral, legacy, and liquidity. Not every annuity does all of those things. Not every client needs all of those things. And not every dollar should be considered for an annuity. That is why the process has to come before the product. Rob's message was, it is not about the product first, it is about the purpose. That helped lower the temperature of the conversation. The client started to see that the word annuity was too broad to judge all at once. It is a category. And within that category, different contracts can have different features, costs, limitations, surrender charge schedules, income options, and liquidity provisions. So instead of arguing about whether annuities were good or bad, Rob guided the client toward a better question. Could any annuity fit a portion of your income strategy, based on your needs and suitability? That is a much more productive trail. From there, the client became open to reviewing whether an annuity may fit a portion of their income strategy. Not because Rob pushed, not because he made a big emotional claim, but because he clarified the objection and returned to a fact-based process. That is the key lesson for agents. Do not argue with an objection. Clarify it. Ask what the client has heard. Ask what concerns them. Ask what they need the money to do. Then bring the discussion back to purpose, suitability, and process. Annuities may help address certain income needs, but only when the product features and client circumstances align. They should be reviewed carefully, explained clearly, and considered as part of a broader income planning conversation. So Rob's trail note is this. When a client brings a strong opinion to the table, do not fight the opinion. Explore it, clarify it, and keep the conversation focused on facts. That is how an agent can stay professional, educational, and useful, even when the trail starts with, "My friend told me." Every trail has a few spots where the path looks clear, until one small missed marker sends everybody back to the map. That is what happened with Anthony. He was helping a client complete an annuity application. Most of the application looked ready. Client information, product details, account information, all moving along. But during the final review, Anthony noticed something that was not as clear as it needed to be: the beneficiary section. Now, beneficiary details can look like routine paperwork. A name here, a percentage there, maybe a relationship box checked off. It can feel like one of those trail signs you pass without thinking much about it. But this case had a blended family, and that changed the conversation. The client had family relationships that needed to be clarified. Anthony had not asked enough questions about who the client intended to name, how the percentages should be listed, and whether the designations aligned with the client's current wishes. That created the roadblock. The application could not just keep moving forward as if everything was clear. The beneficiary section needed additional review, and the case was delayed. Now, nobody likes a delay. In the field, a delayed case can feel like stopping at the trailhead after everyone already packed snacks and picked the route. But this kind of pause can prevent a much larger issue later. Because beneficiary designations matter. They may affect how contract values or death benefit proceeds are directed after the owner's death, depending on the contract terms and applicable rules. And when blended family situations are involved, unclear instructions can create confusion for the carrier, the client, and the family members later. The lesson in this first part is not that Anthony made a dramatic mistake. The lesson is that beneficiary conversations should not be rushed. A clear process includes asking who the client wants to name, confirming spelling and relationships, reviewing percentages, and encouraging the client to consult a legal or tax professional where appropriate. So Anthony's trail challenge was this. He treated the beneficiary section like paperwork, when it needed to be part of the client conversation. On the next slide, we will see how he corrected the issue before it became a larger detour. Here is where Anthony made the right adjustment. He did not try to push the application through and hope the details would sort themselves out later. That would be like seeing a washed-out bridge on the trail and saying, we'll probably be fine. Instead, Anthony paused the application process. He went back to the client and explained that the beneficiary section needed to be clearer before resubmitting. He encouraged the client to consult a legal or tax professional where appropriate, especially because blended family situations can involve legal and tax considerations outside the agent's role. That step matters. Agents can help gather information, explain the purpose of beneficiary designations, and make sure the application is completed accurately. But agents should not provide legal or tax advice. When family structure, estate documents, or tax questions enter the conversation, it is appropriate to bring in the right professional. After that pause, Anthony confirmed the beneficiary details. Names, relationships, percentages, and the client's stated intent were reviewed before the application moved forward again. The outcome was a delay, but not all delays are bad. In this case, the delay helped prevent a larger issue later. The client had time to clarify what they wanted, the application became more complete, and the carrier had cleaner information to review. That is a strong process-based lesson for agents. Beneficiary conversations are not just paperwork details. They are part of responsible income planning and client service. They help document who the client wants listed, how proceeds may be directed under the contract, and whether additional professional guidance may be needed. So the trail note here is clear. Slow down at the beneficiary checkpoint. Review the details. Ask clear questions. Confirm the client's intent. Encourage legal or tax guidance where appropriate. Then submit the application when the information is complete. Because in annuity work, small details can create big detours, and careful review can help keep the case on the right path. This trail story starts in a place agents know well, a Medicare review that turns into a broader financial conversation. Lucas was meeting with a small business owner. They were reviewing Medicare needs, and then the client mentioned something important. He had a large amount of personal savings sitting in cash because he did not want market exposure. Now, cash can have a clear purpose. It can cover emergencies. It can support short-term needs. It can help a business owner handle timing issues, payroll concerns, or unexpected expenses. So Lucas did not hear cash and immediately think, that needs to move. That would have been moving too fast. Instead, he noticed the real trail marker. The money had no defined role. It was not fully emergency cash. It was not clearly future income money. It was not clearly legacy money. And it was not tied to a specific long-term purpose. It was just sitting there, wearing 3 different hiking boots, and not knowing which trail it belonged on. That is where the opportunity appeared. Lucas helped the client begin separating the money into categories. What portion needed to stay available for short-term liquidity? What portion might be connected to future income needs? And what portion, if any, could be considered for longer-term protection from market-related losses? Then came the roadblock. The client said, I need access in case something happens with the business. That was a reasonable concern. A business owner may need more liquidity than someone who does not have employees, overhead, or seasonal cash flow. So the answer was not to move too much money into any product that could limit access. This is an important reminder for agents. Liquidity comes first when liquidity is the client's stated need. An annuity may fit a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on individual circumstances, income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements. But money needed for business operations, emergencies, or short-term access should be identified before any annuity conversation moves forward. So Lucas's challenge was not to convince the client to reposition cash. His challenge was to help the client define what each dollar was supposed to do. Because before a strategy can be considered, the money needs a job description. On the next slide, we will see how Lucas handled that by keeping liquidity available first, then discussing whether only a portion may fit a principal-protected strategy. Here is where Lucas handled the conversation well. He did not treat the client's cash like one big bucket. He treated it like trail gear that needed to be sorted before the hike began. Some money needed to stay accessible. Some money might eventually support future income. And some money, depending on the facts, may have been appropriate to review for longer-term protection. So Lucas recommended keeping an appropriate cash reserve outside of any annuity. That step matters. For a business owner, liquidity is not just a preference. It may be tied to payroll, taxes, equipment, slow seasons, or unexpected business needs. If those dollars may be needed soon, they generally should not be placed into a product with surrender charges or limited access. Only after that liquidity need was identified did Lucas discuss whether a portion of the remaining money may fit a principal-protected strategy. Notice the order: purpose first, strategy second, product discussion only when appropriate. The outcome was measured. The client moved forward with a conservative allocation and kept substantial liquidity available. That means the client did not put every dollar into an annuity. Lucas helped identify which dollars should not go into an annuity, and that is just as important as identifying which dollars may be considered. That is the lesson for agents. A good annuity conversation often starts by asking which money needs to stay accessible. Then, which money is connected to future income. Then, which money may be appropriate for longer-term protection, based on suitability. Annuities may be appropriate for a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements. They are not designed to hold every dollar a client has available. So Lucas's trail note is clear. Do not treat idle cash as automatic annuity money. Sort the dollars. Keep emergency and business cash accessible. Identify future income needs. Then review whether a portion may fit a principal-protected income strategy. That kind of process helps agents educate responsibly and grow their business through clear, fact-based conversations. The room was set. The chairs were lined up. The slides worked. The coffee was mostly hot, which, for a seminar, is already a small victory. Mike hosted an educational event, and by most surface-level measures it went well. People listened. They nodded. A few stayed afterward to ask questions. Several attendees seemed interested in learning more about income needs, principal-protected strategies, and how annuities may fit a portion of their retirement savings. But after the room cleared out, Mike noticed something. The chairs were empty, the handouts were left behind, and his calendar was also pretty empty. No follow-up strategy sessions had been scheduled. Now, this does not mean the seminar failed. The attendees received education. They heard useful information. But the next step was not clear enough. Mike ended with, "Call me if you have questions." That sounds polite, and it is. But it is also vague. Most people will not leave an educational event, go home, sort through their statements, think through income sources, review liquidity needs, evaluate risk tolerance, and then decide on their own what to ask next. That is a lot to expect from someone who just came for an educational seminar, and maybe a cookie. The roadblock was not a lack of interest. The roadblock was uncertainty. The attendees left informed, but they did not know what to do next. Should they schedule a review? Should they bring statements? Should they talk about income needs? Should they compare current resources to future income goals? Mike had not clearly framed the next step as a process-based strategy session. That is the lesson on this first slide. Education is valuable, but education should connect to a clear, appropriate next step, not pressure, not urgency, not act now. Just a calm invitation to continue the conversation in a more personal and fact-based setting. For agents, the key is this. When the seminar ends, the path should not disappear. Mike needed to show attendees what the next checkpoint looked like. Organize income sources, review goals, discuss risk tolerance, evaluate liquidity needs, and determine whether an annuity may be appropriate for a portion of their savings based on suitability. On the next slide, we will see how Mike adjusted the process so attendees knew exactly where the trail continued. At Mike's next event, he made one important change. He did not make the seminar more aggressive. He did not add pressure. He did not turn the education into a product pitch. He simply made the next step clearer. Near the close of the event, Mike said something like, "The next step is a strategy session, where we organize your income sources, review risk tolerance, and identify whether a principal-protected strategy may be appropriate for a portion of your savings." That is a much better trail sign. It tells attendees what the follow-up is, what will be reviewed, and why the session may be useful. It also keeps the conversation process-based instead of product-first. Mike was not saying, "Everyone here needs an annuity." He was saying there is a structured way to review whether an annuity may fit your individual circumstances. That distinction matters. A proper strategy session can help organize income sources, identify liquidity needs, discuss time horizon, review existing resources, and determine whether there may be an income gap. From there, an annuity may be considered for a portion of savings if the client's needs, product features, and suitability requirements align. The outcome was better because the next step was clear and educational. More attendees chose to schedule reviews because they understood the purpose. They were not being pushed toward an application. They were being invited into a fact-based conversation. That is the lesson for agents. A seminar should not end with a vague, "Call me if you have questions." That puts all the responsibility on the attendee to figure out what comes next. Instead, offer a clear next checkpoint, a strategy session, an income review, and a risk tolerance discussion. Explain what will happen, what information may be helpful, and that any recommendation depends on individual circumstances and suitability. So Mike's trail note is this: education needs a clear next step. Keep it calm, keep it process-based, keep it focused on income needs, client goals, liquidity, and suitability. That way, attendees leave knowing not just what they learned, but where the trail continues. This trail story starts with two people looking at the same map and seeing two completely different routes. A married couple sat down with an agent to talk through their savings and future income needs. One spouse was focused on growth potential. They still wanted part of their money positioned for possible upside. The other spouse was focused on principal protection and a more predictable income stream. At first, it sounded like they disagreed about the money, but the agent noticed something important. They were not really arguing about the dollars. They were describing different jobs for the dollars. One spouse was saying, "I do not want to miss growth opportunities." The other was saying, "I do not want to expose everything to market-related losses, and I want to know where income may come from." Both priorities can be valid. The challenge is when all the money gets treated like it has to follow one trail. That is where the conversation can get stuck. Each spouse thought the other was ignoring their concerns. One heard growth and thought, "Too much risk." The other heard protection and thought, "Not enough opportunity." So the agent slowed the conversation down and stopped treating it like a debate. Instead of asking, which spouse is right, he focused on a better question. What role should each portion of the money play? That led to the bucket conversation: liquidity, income, growth potential, and legacy. Some money may need to stay accessible. Some may be reviewed for future income needs. Some may remain positioned for growth potential. And some may be connected to legacy goals. An annuity may be appropriate for a portion of a client's retirement savings, depending on income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements. But that does not mean every dollar should go the same direction. So the roadblock in part 1 is clear. The couple looked divided, but they really needed a process to organize competing priorities. On the next slide, we will see how the agent helped them stop arguing over the trail signs and start assigning each dollar a purpose. Here is where the agent made the right move. He did not become the referee. No whistle, no striped shirt, no "I declare spouse number 1 the winner." That would not have helped anybody. Instead, he said, both priorities can be valid. The question is, how much of the money belongs in each category? That one sentence changed the tone of the conversation. Now the couple was not fighting over one big pile of money. They were looking at separate purposes. The agent helped them sort the dollars into categories: liquidity, income, growth potential, and legacy. That gave each spouse a place on the map. For the spouse who wanted growth potential, not all assets had to be moved into a principal-protected strategy. Some money could remain positioned for different goals, depending on the client's overall circumstances and risk tolerance. For the spouse who wanted principal protection and income, a portion of assets could be reviewed to see whether an annuity may fit the income strategy, based on product features and suitability. That is the key. Only a portion was considered for an annuity. The rest remained positioned for other goals. That outcome made the conversation more productive, because the strategy followed the purpose of the money. The agent did not force one answer across every account. He helped the couple define what each dollar was supposed to do. For agents, this is a strong lesson. When spouses disagree, do not pick a side. Ask better questions. What money needs to stay liquid? What money may support income? What money is intended for growth potential? What money is connected to legacy goals? Then let the facts guide the strategy. Annuities may help provide principal protection and, depending on the contract, may support an income stream for life. Guarantees are based on the claims-paying ability of the issuing insurance carrier, and any recommendation should be based on suitability. So the trail note is straightforward: separate the goals before discussing the product. When each dollar has a clear role, the conversation can move from disagreement to a more organized income planning process. Chris had a client who was interested in creating an income stream for life. The conversation went well. They reviewed the client's income needs, talked through product features, and looked at an illustration based on the terms available at that time. So far, so good. But then the paperwork sat, not for a day or two, not just over a long weekend. The client waited several months before deciding he was ready to move forward. Now that can happen. Clients may need time to review, talk with family, gather information, or decide whether a strategy fits their situation. There is nothing wrong with taking time to make an informed decision. But here is the trail marker Chris needed the client to understand. Illustrations are based on current product terms, and current does not mean permanent. By the time the client came back ready to submit the paperwork, the trail conditions had changed. Rates were different. Product features had changed. The original illustration no longer matched what was currently available. And that created the roadblock. The client expected the first numbers to still apply. That is a common challenge. A client may look at an illustration and think of it like a reservation. But in most cases, an illustration is not a permanent offer. It is a point-in-time example based on the product terms available when it was prepared. So Chris had to pause the conversation and reset expectations. The issue was not that the client waited. The issue was that the client did not fully understand that waiting could affect the numbers, features, or income amount available later. For agents, this is an important reminder. When reviewing an annuity illustration, explain clearly that rates, product features, rider terms, and income amounts may change. Any recommendation should be based on the client's individual circumstances, income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements at the time of the review. So Chris's challenge was not just submitting paperwork. His challenge was making sure the client understood that the map from several months ago might not match today's trail. On the next slide, we will see how Chris updated the review and kept the conversation fact-based. Here is where Chris handled the situation the right way. He did not try to stretch the old illustration into today's conversation. He did not say, "close enough." And he did not treat the first numbers as if they were still available. Instead, he explained the facts. Chris told the client that illustrations are based on current product terms and may change. Then he updated the review, compared the new numbers, and documented the revised discussion. That may sound like a small step, but it matters. In income planning, the details are part of the process. Rates, product features, payout factors, rider availability, and contract terms can affect the outcome. If those details change, the conversation should be updated before the client makes a decision. Chris then walked the client through the new illustration. The strategy still appeared to fit the client's income needs, but the income amount was different from the first illustration. That is the key outcome on this slide. The client still moved forward, but with current information instead of outdated numbers. That is much stronger than relying on an old example that no longer reflects available terms. For agents, the lesson is clear. Always explain that illustrations are not permanent offers. They are educational tools based on information available at that time. A good phrase might be, "These numbers are based on current product terms." If rates, features, or carrier terms change before the application is submitted and approved, we may need to update the review. That keeps expectations clear and process-based. Annuities may be appropriate for a portion of a client's retirement savings depending on income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, product features, and suitability requirements. But the review should use current information. So Chris's trail note is this: do not let an old illustration become the map for today's decision. Update the numbers. Compare the changes. Document the conversation. Then help the client decide based on the trail conditions in front of them now. And here we are at the final overlook. This is the spot on the trail where we pause, look back at the footprints, and ask, what did these stories actually teach us? Across each trail story, the names changed, the client situations changed, and the roadblocks looked a little different. But the path forward stayed pretty consistent. Start with discovery before discussing any strategy. That one step can prevent a lot of wrong turns. When an agent moves too quickly to a product, even with good intentions, the client may feel rushed or unclear about why that conversation applies to them. Discovery helps identify the facts first: income needs, liquidity needs, time horizon, risk tolerance, existing resources, beneficiaries, and the client's goals for that portion of money. Next, match each dollar to a clear purpose. Some dollars may need to stay liquid. Some may be intended for income. Some may be positioned for growth potential. Some may be connected to legacy goals. And some may need principal protection from market-related losses. The point is not to make every dollar take the same trail. The point is to define the job of each dollar before discussing what strategy may fit. That is where a clear income planning process can help. Annuities may fit a portion of a client's savings when appropriate for the client's situation. They are not right for every person, every goal, or every dollar. Product features, surrender charges, liquidity provisions, income options, fees, and suitability requirements all matter. So when we think back to Ben, Kyle, Rob, Anthony, Lucas, Mike, Chris, and the other trail stories, the lesson is not always recommend an annuity. It is almost the opposite. The lesson is, slow down, ask better questions, review the facts, document the discussion, and let suitability guide the next step. Sometimes the right next step may be a new strategy. Sometimes it may be keeping an existing contract. Sometimes it may be leaving cash available. And sometimes it may be pausing the conversation until the client has confirmed legal, tax, or beneficiary details with the appropriate professional. That is responsible fieldwork. For agents, this process can support better conversations, clearer recommendations, and stronger client understanding. It also helps you grow your business the right way through education, consistency, and a client-centered process. So as we leave this section of the trail, remember the markers on the sign: discovery, purpose, suitability, and next step. Follow those footprints forward, and you will be much less likely to wander into a product-first conversation before the client's real needs are clear.